Welcome to Rock Docs, a podcast about music documentaries. I'm one of the hosts, Dave, here with my co-host,
Andrew Keats.
And we are joined by a special guest, your friend and mine, Ray Padgett. He's the man who brings you the Bob Dylan Substack newsletter, Flagging Down the Double E's. Also the Tom Waits one, all the Tom Waits songs or something. Is that what it's called?
Every Tom Waits song, but either way, you
okay.
get the idea.
Okay, I like that one too. And the recent book, Pledging My Time, which is like, I just tore through that thing. It's a collection of interviews Ray did with many people who spent time primarily on the road with one Bob Dylan. So anyway, Ray, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So we are here to talk about, I say this from time to time, but definitely counts now. A bit of a rock doc classic. Andy, is that fair to say here?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing that we made it, 2 years without doing what is like maybe the most rock doc of them all. I don't know. the rock doc.
Yeah. We are Ray knows a thing or two about Bob Dylan, is what we're here to say. And so we're talking about Don't Look Back, starring, that's right, Bob Dylan. Directed by D.A. Pennebaker. It was filmed in 1965 and it was released in 1967. And I don't know if you're vaguely familiar with music documentaries. If that's your thing, you probably are familiar with this one. But it's just hanging out with Bob while he's having a chill time, having a nice chat occasionally with British journalists and playing some songs and having a jolly old time in jolly old England, right? That's about it? That wraps it up?
He does some jokes. He spars a little bit with some people. He plays some songs, and then we go home. That's.
I honestly can't believe you guys haven't done this before. When you reached out to me on Twitter or whatever, I figured you'd want to do the Winston Watson homemade documentary about the 90s or something really esoteric. Not Don't Look Back, for goodness sakes. How was that not episode 1?
We kind of been saving some of the classics, either out of just trying to dose it out, kind of like a band, like they don't want to put, Guns N' Roses didn't want to put Don't Cry on their first album, save something, or out of sheer terror, maybe, intimidation, whatever you want to call it. So we've got a few of those.
Interestingly, Rolling Thunder review was our first. So
true.
We basically started on the other end. We started with the closer.
Yeah, we started with the
Bob
closer.
Dylan rock docs are concerned.
And we also had our friends Ian and Evan from Jokerman on to host to discuss everybody's favorite Bob Dylan documentary, The Other Side of the Rainbow.
I listened to that one. Yeah, I remember. The Rolling Thunder one, you probably got into this, but it's funny you started there because, of course, is that even a documentary? Does that even count?
It ended up poisoning the show for the first 10 or 12 episodes because it suggested that part of what we would be doing was like defining what was and wasn't a rock doc, as opposed to that just dominating a great deal of our first conversation because it had to.
We really stepped on the rake just right out of the gate, but it's fine. We got past it. We're still here. So sometimes if it's like a more obscure artist, we'll be like, when did you first hear this person? Or were you previously a fan of this before seeing the documentary? But that would obviously be foolish. But let's just kind of talk about our formative experiences with this documentary. Ray, when did you first see this one?
It had to have been fairly early in my Dylan fandom. So I became a Dylan fan in high school, which is like the mid 2000s. And I probably got the DVD within a year or so. I mean, as you say, it's sort of, you get Blonde on Blonde, you get Blood on the Tracks, and then, by your fourth or fifth purchase is probably going to be Don't Look Back. But the funny thing is I got the DVD. I probably watched it like 5 times, the first year I had it. And then honestly, I'm not sure I've watched it again until this week. I like the sort of the famous scenes, and I'm sure we'll get to some of them. But like in terms of as a single piece, I hadn't watched it in like pushing 20 years.
Yeah, I was trying to think when I was watching it when I saw it for the first time, and I like don't have a formative memory of buying it or sitting down to watch it for the first time. I sort of like I sort of just don't remember having not already seen it. If that makes sense,
Same, 100% same.
Yeah, like I'm guessing it probably happened when I was in college, maybe from the from the school library or something like that. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure where I would have seen it, but also I'm certain I saw it a very long time ago and many times.
Yeah, I kind of remember going through a little bit of a tear in high school of like renting whatever rock docs were available at Blockbuster,
which was like 8 of them.
Yeah, which was like this, and maybe Stop Making Sense, and maybe Imagine Lennon. I remember that one. The one of the Bob Marley ones. My favorite guy. And all the Bobs, and yeah. So, but yeah, I don't really remember. And then, kind of similar to what you said, Ray. Like, I think it's fair to say that all three of us are pretty heavy down the road of Dylan fandom, where it's like the kind of top 5 or 10 classic albums and things like this that you kind of get into when you're first getting into Dylan. Just like, I mean, you kind of, it's not like you leave it behind, but like it doesn't, like it doesn't really occur to me like wake up in the morning and go like, oh, today I'm going to listen to Highway 61 Revisited. Like, not that I wouldn't enjoy it. It's just like, I'm so into the bootlegs and the this and that like, you forget I don't know, you kind of not leave it behind, but it's kind of nice to come back to this old favorite.
We're all Dylan nerds here. And I think that's exactly right. Like intellectually, I can't justify listening to Empire Burlesque more than I listen to Blonde on Blonde, right? I can't like make the argument that that's the right decision, but like it's probably been true for a number of years, just because like everyone, Blonde on Blonde, I burned out, just listened to a million times, and I know those songs backwards and forwards. So yeah, this is definitely the Blonde on Blonde of Bob Dylan documentaries.
Maybe we'll kick off a trend in the Dylan world of like going back and listen. You know what I mean? Like the anti-Jokerman. Like within, what's actually good is bringing it all back home.
Yeah, within the Dylan nerd community, it's like the real contrary move is to only go through the pre-66 stuff.
Yeah, that's the backlash to the backlash. Be like, right. It was so lame when he went Christian, and the '80s sucks, and like that's the contrarian move now.
He doesn't even sing the songs the way they're supposed to sound.
Yeah, right.
Andy, are there people in the Phish community that like are only fans of the albums, but they're like really fans of the albums?
Not that far, but you definitely encounter people who are like, I don't know, man. I like the albums. I know it's not cool in the community to say you like the albums, but I do. Rift is great, man. I think Rift's one of the fantastic '90s indie rock album. You'll hear that stuff for sure.
Okay, all right, fair enough. All right, enough of the Phish talk. Why don't even bring it up?
You asked, brother. This is first time in show history. It was not me.
All right. So, Ray, as the official certified Dylan historian here, can you situate our boy in this time and place when this film is made?
Sure. So the movie takes place in spring of 1965. He's on a tour of the UK. It's sort of an interesting inflection point. On his records, he has officially, quote unquote, gone electric. Bringing It All Back Home has come out. It has Subterranean Homesick Blues and a number of other songs that are loud and rocking with a full band. In concert, he has not gone electric. This is about 2 months before Newport Folk Festival. So which is, part of why the movie's interesting. He's doing this sort of acoustic tour, singing The Times They Are Changin', even while his head and his heart appears to be in this sort of full band sound, which he's doing on record, but not in concert yet. So it's sort of the end of one thing and the beginning of another.
Now, Maybe you could clarify this for me, because just based on what the culture was in 1965, I would suspect that when people saw this movie in 1967 or whatever, it had to have like quintupled the amount of Bob Dylan exposure they had ever had in their lives. But just by virtue of there not being that much live interview footage available in the world at the time, that much live concert footage in the world at the time, unless you were like an inner circle person who was going to lots of concerts and trying to chase down interviews. I would imagine most people were seeing Bob Dylan intimately for basically the first time in this movie. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I know Zoom ages you. I was not actually around in 1967, but I mean, I think it's sort of interesting. I guess that's the other side of it, what you're saying. So it's filmed, right, 1965, about sort of has half and half gone electric. Doesn't come out for 2 years. Big change by the time it comes out because he's had the motorcycle crash. He's disappeared. Is he dead? Is he paralyzed? Turns out he's like up there recording with the band, but no one knows this at the time. So yeah, I mean, it would be. I sort of was wondering, watching, like, how much a part of this movie's lore was that this sort of man who had, as far as anyone could see, had this brief glimpse of fame and then disappeared, potentially forever. And now you have, an hour and a half of this really good footage of him. And, in many cases, unless they saw him live in person, it probably was the only footage a lot of people had seen of him.
Yeah, kind of like, love the image of like maybe Bob and like Robbie like went to the movies up in Woodstock and saw this, and then came back and recorded like Apple Suckling Tree or something. Like it's like a million years later. It obviously we all know, the 60s things were different then, kids, but it really is like such a weird kind of time warp situation.
Yeah, but between the time the movie is filmed and the movie comes out, Bob Dylan has gone electric and ungone electric.
Yeah.
He's done the full cycle in between filming and release just 2 years later.
Yeah, exactly. It's 2 years. I mean, basically, by the time people are seeing this, it comes out in 67, but I saw like Roger Ebert's review came out in early 68. So like when a lot of people were seeing it was probably 68. Like by that point, he's gone through 3 full important cycles of Dylan history since it was recorded.
Well, not just Dylan, but also like, this,
sure,
when this is filmed in early 65, like we're still kind of in a relatively early stage of like Beatlemania. This is in England. Most of the guys that are seen are wearing suits and ties, and it's that, and maybe they have longish hair, but, you're still in that black and white. Like this could have been, you could easily do this double feature with A Hard Day's Night, and it would seem like more or less contemporaneous, and yet, now it's whatever 60, 68, and Sgt. Pepper's come out, all these other things have happened. So, all right, let's kind of start with the start here, which, I mean, this is a good way to start Rock Talk. Let's put it that way. I think we can all agree. You want to kick it off with the first and arguably best music video ever. That's a good start. Why not? It starts off with the famous video for Subterranean Homesick Blues. Now, famously, Dylan ripped this off from INXS. We won't hold that against him. That's a joke for people old. The one person on this podcast who's old enough to remember INXS. But so you got it just really kicks in with the video where Bob's flipping the note cards more or less to the lyrics of the song, and you've got Allen Ginsberg talking to, I don't remember who, behind him. Ginsberg kind of has a real rabbinical look in the background, because he's got that kind of beard, and he's wearing like a sweater. He's doing like the sweater over the shoulders thing, but not tied, so like the arms are hanging down over his chest, and it's like a light colored sweater, and he's wearing like a dark suit, so it really looks like he's wearing like a tallis. Like, it's, and then and that kind of ties into something I have to say about later in the movie, but we'll get there. But This is like, I would say, the origin, or at least the filmed origin, of Dylan's kind of gunfighter stance. You know, like the stance he continues to do to this day. You know, as we're recording, he's on tour, and he'll come out to the front of the stage and he'll kind of do that pose that he sort of nailed right here.
Yeah, side cocked. Yeah. Yeah, so I read an interesting interview with D.A. Pennybaker, and he said basically he was introduced to Dylan, and the first thing Dylan said was, "Hey, I've got this idea for a video. You would just film me, and I would stand there with some cards that I would have the lyrics, would play the song, and I would just flip through the cards as they go." And Pennybaker goes, "That's brilliant. Let's do it."
Okay, that's a good pitch.
Yeah. So
I mean, I think there was. I was reading some stuff too, and their promo videos did exist, like the Rolling Stones. People did them. The thing said it was sort of big on British TV, but typically it was just basically someone miming along to a track, either acting like they're playing live or maybe in an interesting setting. But Dylan, if you've ever seen his actual music videos, he's extremely terrible at lip syncing. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that he was much better at it in 1967. So, like, how much of this was him just getting out of, like, you got to do some sort of promo video that they can show on British late night TV or wherever else. He's like, I don't want to just stand there mouthing the words, so maybe I write them down.
Yeah, it's really a silent film, is how I would describe it. I mean, obviously, it's to the soundtrack of Subterranean Homesick Blues, but like the sort of texture and vibe of it. I mean, it's all one shot. If you haven't seen the video for Subterranean Homesick Blues, please feel free to dial it up, people. Yeah. But the early
if you're listening to this show and you haven't ever seen the footage of the Subterranean Homesick Blues proto music video, please text us. You're an interesting person.
Or maybe you're not sure, but if you watch like 1 second of it, you'd be like, oh yeah, that. It's like a famous.
What if someone has only seen remember they made like a remake of it a year or two ago with like all these famous celebrities that they think we're talking about, Bruce Springsteen holding it up.
Let's do an episode about that one. Yes. That would be real. That would be the good stuff. But anyway, so it really does have that, like, there's this kind of thing where people compare Dylan to like Charlie Chaplin or something. And as somebody who, like, I'm going to out myself as being like even more of a nerd than maybe anybody thought possible, but I kind of do watch a lot of silent movies, and and it really does kind of capture the vibe, like something about the light on his face, the fact that it's all in one shot and it's sort of this medium frame, and the sort of action happening in the background, the way that he's standing, he's just kind of like flipping the cards. It really does have that. I don't know. It captures it better. It captures the experience of watching like a really old silent movie better than any reproduction in like a modern movie like The Artist or Babylon or something, where they're kind of trying to do it and maybe they do it okay, but it's not. It looks, it's like they say, like, certain actors, they look like, they have a face, like this face has seen an iPhone. You know what I mean? They can't do period work. But Bob has the face where he could pull off the period.
Yeah. Well, there's also something to it. And so Pennybaker said that it was sort of happenstance how it was framed and filmed, that they were trying to do it and the wind was screwing with them, and that there was some deafening sound in the first couple places they did it. So they ended up in an alley just because there would be less wind and they would be hidden from the sound. And I think maybe he said that there was like a constable of some sort that was sort of hassling them. So they just sort of ended up there. But that setting ends up lending itself to what you're talking about as well. It looks very like, early 20th century, and particularly even like after the music cuts off and Ginsberg walks across, that's like very silent film to me. The sort of like suddenly we're back into this just being an open place where people are moving around and things are happening. Like all of that stuff, at least to Pennybaker's after the fact myth making, was sort of coincidental, and I think ends up working to its benefit.
Ray, is this Bob's best music video? Should he have just stopped there?
No, I would say no. I would point to The Night We Called It a Day, which is the one. Speaking of silent film, it's not quite silent film, but he goes full film noir and there's a whole
Yeah.
plot, and Bob Dylan ends up shooting someone with an old timey gun. I'm gonna, like I say, I listen to Empire Burlesque more than I listen to Blonde on Blonde, so I would pick The Night We Called It a Day, which is not even a song he wrote. It's one of his many Sinatra covers. I realize I would be in the minority on that one, though, among Dylan fans.
I've got another offering for his best music video. This will be at least the second time I've mentioned this, but the Series of Dreams montage as used in the end of John from Cincinnati. Cut that outside of the context of the film, put it out as a music video. That's art. That is gold right there. All right. I know by looking at your face, David, you still haven't watched it. No matter how many times I suggest it, you won't watch it, but it's so good.
There's no more beloved bit than you're stumping for a long forgotten San Diego based HBO prestige TV show about a guy who surfs or something.
What do I need to say about it except that they use Series of Dreams in the payoff scene of the entire series?
All right, I'll put it on the list. Okay, so let's talk about the actual rest of the film because we've covered the first 3 minutes, I think.
Yeah.
All right, so Ray, I mean, do we know like why Bob agreed to be the subject of a documentary at this moment, or did it just kind of was one of those things?
I haven't found a good answer for that. And the funny thing is, it was his, or at least his office's idea. Albert Grossman is the one that came to D.A. Pennebaker, who was not some Dylan massive super. He sort of became one, but he wasn't a Dylan super fan. Apparently, I think Sarah Lowndes, Dylan's girlfriend, worked in Pennebaker's office, and so Grossman's people was like, who should we find? So anyway, so this was sort of the Dylan, again, office's idea. But in terms of Bob himself's motivation, as with so many questions about Bob himself's motivations, it seems a little murky.
It's sort of all there, right? Like the motivation to do it and his behavior through it all. It's like even this like still might be the most access anyone ever had to Bob Dylan, like throughout everything that came afterwards. And yet, even with all that access, this is like as mysterious as he ever was too. I don't really feel like I learned much more about him through watching this than I would have known had I not watched this.
Well, it's like the scene where he's reading about himself in the British tabloid newspaper, and he goes, "Oh, I'm glad I'm not me."
Yeah. I mean, watching this as someone who knows an obscene amount about Bob Dylan, it was kind of making me wonder, like, to your point, Andrew, like it does no hand-holding whatsoever, right? I mean, the style, if people haven't seen it, there's no talking heads, there's no voiceovers, there's no cards or other than the ones he's holding in Subterranean Homes Blues, there's no like title cards or anything popping up on the screen, even identifying like who the hell the people on screen are. So if like you don't recognize Albert Grossman by face or Bob Newirth, which I mean, other than the people in this call, like who would, it is the whole thing is mysterious. And I wonder if to some degree Dylan liked that. I mean, I do know he had at some point before this happened gone and watched several of Pennebaker's earlier films. So he did sort of know his style. And I do wonder if that was sort of appealing to him. It's, it's not a documentary in sort of a straightforward classic sense. It is an art piece. And I could feel like him being into that because he's mysterious in the film. The way it's done is fairly mysterious as well.
Yeah. Not only are there not any of those like post-production elements that you mentioned, talking heads or cards or, any sort of scene setting like that, there's not even any edits, basically. Like every time we drop in on our, Bob Dylan's traveling crew, they're like 8-minute scenes with no cuts. It's just like you really are in the room for whatever the length of that thing that D.A. Pennebaker thought was really interesting. So, which I think really adds to the cinema verite of it, that you get immersed in what's actually happening and you don't have to guess like, oh, what was that combative or was that a harsh cut that made it seem abrupt. You know, like you are really seeing how these conversations are playing out because they play out in full on camera. They peter out and die before we cut away.
Yeah, most
And
of the
it's
time it
one-
seems like it's one camera. Like it's not like a thing where they had, a crew with multiple people filming. There may be a few exceptions, but mostly it just seems like it's Pennebaker maybe holding the camera and then a sound person, and that's what it is. And the look of it is so cool. Like, it seems like it's probably shot on 16 millimeter. It has that kind of grimy, lo-fi kind of look. The sound is pretty good. But I would hate for Peter Jackson to use AI to remaster this and have it look, like almost pristine in 3D. Like it works so well for what it is that, but I do wonder, and of course we ask this all the time, but okay, this is 90 minutes. How long was he with Bob? How much footage was there? Does that footage still exist? And could we ever get like a bootleg series version of this? Because, I'm sure there is no amount of footage that they could release that the, Ray Patches and David Andys of the world would not watch of Bob in 1965. Like every frame of that is gold. Like if it's out there.
Ray,
there are some outtakes released. I think the Criterion Collection is where they first surfaced. That's about as close as we get to a bootleg series, though, of course. They're on YouTube now. Some interesting other scenes. But one thing I found interesting is I always assumed, which I think you often do watching something like this, is when there's like 30 seconds or 45 seconds of a song, well, the guy filmed the whole song or probably the full concert, and then he just picked whatever. But they were on such a tight budget that Pennebaker said, like, no, if you see like 2 lines of him singing a song, those are the only 2 lines I filmed, because that's all the film we could afford. So my sense, just extrapolating from that, is that there's not probably 50 hours of Don't Look Back, or I'm making up the number, but they were fairly tight with the amount of film they had. And he was making these sort of tough choices on what to actually commit to tape.
Yeah, I also read that he made the amount of additional footage that he had, and yeah, I did read that he basically said I didn't record full songs. There's no like full song recordings laying around out there, but the extra stuff that he had that was in his estate, he gave to Scorsese.
Right.
So
yeah, there's some stuff that shows up there. Yeah, and it's just amazing that Columbia, did not think like, let's give this guy a few bucks to make sure we get all this stuff recorded so we can like release live concert albums existed at this time. It's just so they made the constant short-sightedness of these record companies when we watch the old docs is incredible.
But Pennebaker didn't seem broken up about the not having done the full thing. He seemed like, I didn't want to make a concert movie. We were intentionally doing something different. So, I'm sure he would have taken the extra budget and filmed more stuff, but it doesn't seem like that's what he wanted to do.
Right. All right. This is really more or less nonlinear. It doesn't really tell a story from beginning to end. It's just stuff happening with Bob in this little period of time where he's touring through the UK. So I think maybe we just kind of do a little round robin and talk about some favorite moments and scenes and things like that. Right.
Sure. Yeah. So here's one thing, because this was especially apparent to me early on, and maybe throughout, but early on it was on my mind a lot. Is like, to your point earlier, David, about how this is more or less contemporaneous with like Hard Day's Night, or at least not too long after it. Is to the extent that there's like a theme, it's like the world around Bob's profound inability to understand who he was and what he was doing, and his complete disinterest in explaining it to them. It on the verge of antagonism, not even on the verge, becoming antagonism that he was expected to. And like all of these early interactions are just like people being bewildered by the person in front of them and trying very hard to understand what it is. And Bob basically trying to make it harder for them, basically. And that's where you get this, like, I think that's sort of the reputation that he built here, is this pugilist with everyone that came in front of him, because all of his interactions, particularly early in this movie, are um, almost oddly antagonistic.
Except for Joan and Albert, like
Well, except for
the people in the inner circle, right?
And really, particularly, there's like one scene where they're like, he's on the typewriter at night with Joan, and they're playing music together, and that's like, I think they even say in that scene, like, this is the first cool night we've had out here, or something along those lines.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, when one of the other themes, something that struck out at me, is just tying into what you're saying. It just shows how isolated he is, despite being surrounded by people at all times. Like, it seems like they don't have locks on his dressing room doors or anything, because any random Brit can just wander in and harangue him at any hour of the day, seemingly. But nevertheless, I mean, there's no other Bob Dylan there, right? He's got friends, he's got Bobby Newirth, he's got his manager, he's got people he knows, but clearly it's just sort of him against the world. And I think that is, I think the film sort of shows you that's why he ends up being, kind of a jerk to any number of people in it.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a situation where, like, the experience of watching this movie is, because everything's so close, is just that, like, this is a person who, like, every room he walks into, he is the center of attention. He's like the Louis XIV. The entire court is arranged around him. People are jockeying for position. He's kind of miserable. Like, this is the oldest story in the book, right? He seems like to not be thrilled by the whole thing, and yet everybody is trying to climb that greasy pole to get near him, except for, like I said, Joan, who's just kind of bemused about the whole thing, and comes off like the coolest person who ever walked the earth. Absolutely. Let's just say, first of all, every time I watch this, I'm reminded that she pronounced her name Joan Baez, and I always think it's Baez. Like, I don't know why. Like, but I never remember that, but except when I watch it, and I'm like, oh yeah, so like the accent's on the first syllable.
Oh yeah, how humiliating is that? Where she gets interviewed or photographed by some guy who you assume knows who she is, and then at the end he's like, all right, now who are you? And she has to spell it. Right. She has to spell it for him. Like, come on, dude. What are you doing?
Right. It's pretty lame. Although, like, this is, before, nowadays we know what everybody looks like, and you know what I mean? Like, on social media. So I kind of get it. But yeah, it's definitely humiliating. But I mean, if anybody is the star, the winner of this movie, it's Joan. She, every scene she's in, she just seems like she is, just living her best life. When she sings, she is the voice of an angel. When she's not singing, she's like making faces, eating a banana, just like having a time. Like, she just seems so chill. Like the chillest. If you have to go on a road trip with somebody, it seems like Joan Baez would be the person.
She's the only person in this whole cohort who's like well adjusted and is just like, yeah, I don't know. It's like it's a tour. There's going to be a lot of people coming and going. What do you want out of them? You're like, even Albert Grossman is like cussing out hotel managers and stuff. Now, granted, I guess it's like basically his job, but like, she's the only person who's basically chill, beginning to end.
And what's interesting, and maybe this is again just me knowing too much backstory, but is that she was not living her best life. She went on this tour, ostensibly assuming that she was going to be performing with Bob Dylan. She sort of, she said in one of her memoirs or something that, she in America had introduced Bob Dylan to many people. He'd show up at her shows, they'd do 3 songs together. She, I don't believe, had ever toured England before, and she sort of was expecting the reverse to happen. Bob Dylan's a big star, he's going to bring me out, and we're going to do, sing Blowing in the Wind as a duet or whatever. And so it's sort of interesting watching her in the movie, because a lot of the time she is exactly what you're saying. She's singing, parody lyrics involving a banana to maybe It's All Over Now, Baby Blue or something, and she's goofing around with the photographer. But then that moment when you mentioned a few minutes ago where she's singing Percy's song,
yeah.
A Dylan song, well, just sort of to herself, Dylan is fully ignoring her. He's just typing as loudly as a man has ever typed on a typewriter. Albert Grossman is like reading a letter or something, and she's just sort of singing it almost to no one, and it's stunning. It's like this amazing performance, and she's just sort of in the corner being ignored. I mean, there's that side of it too, which is just comes off as fairly tragic.
Yeah, that Percy song performance might be the best musical moment in the movie. At least for me, I don't know. It's so good, and it reminds me because the of the Fairport Convention version of this, and I was wondering, I was like, had that already come out, and she was doing a version of it more close to what Fairport Convention did. No, the Fairport Convention didn't record it until '69.
Totally
There you
wrong.
go.
Maybe they watch this and that's maybe the arrow of causation has been reversed, Andy.
Exactly.
They I interviewed Richard Thompson for this book, and I asked him about that because they covered a number of these songs around the same time, all like super obscure and unreleased. They did this one. They did "If You Gotta Go, Go Now," which they translated into French, and one other, all of which were like not songs you could buy on Bob Dylan albums. And I think they had been printed, at least one had been printed in like a Bob Dylan songbook, and that might have been Percy's song, like a physical book you could buy, and maybe it had the chords or something. And then the other ones, they were established enough that they were able to, get the demos or whatever.
Got it. Fascinating.
Yeah.
So, and then there's like Bob Newirth and Alan Price are like always around, basically. Like besides Joan and Grossman, like those two guys are the ones that are like on Dylan's hip the whole time. And I don't know, Ray, could you like tell us a little bit about their history with Dylan and how they ended up? I mean, because Newirth was a folk singer as well before he became essentially Dylan's road manager. What was their relationship like at this point? Because I read a couple moments that said that, and this is something I did not pick up at all, even looking closely for it, that Dylan treats Newirth conspiratorially in the movie, which I did not see at all. But I don't know if you have any insight into their relationship.
Yeah, so Newirth was someone he knew, from the Village scene, and yeah, I guess he's ostensibly the road manager or anything, but basically he's along as a buddy. That's his role, is a friend who doesn't treat Bob Dylan like Bob Dylan, and he did that for years on and off. I mean, Rolling Thunder Revue, he's back as sort of almost the co-frontman on some songs, and I interviewed a bunch of Rolling Thunder musicians, and all of them, some more diplomatically than others, were like, the guy can't sing. He can't play guitar. Like, he's up here with like Mick Ronson. But like, again, he was there maybe secondarily as a musician, but he's there primarily as like Dylan's buddy to like hang out and make him not feel, quite so isolated. Alan Price is more interesting. And I hadn't really remembered his role in this movie at all, because I don't know that he had any relationship with Dylan before or after. I mean, there's even a moment at one point when Dylan's like, so are you still in the Animals? Yeah. So like, he clearly doesn't know that much. I mean, that's like the guy's main claim to fame, and Dylan has no idea. So he seems like a fun guy to be around, but I'm not sure that Newirth and him had a long-standing relationship. I don't know if him and Alan Price did.
It's that part is so funny, because it's like everything I knew about this was like former Animals piano player, keys guy hangs out with Dylan. And then I totally forgotten that in the movie he's just like, so yeah, what's up with you and the Animals? And like, it's like he's getting the news for the first time. Or like, you'd almost, if you didn't know any better, expect that it was like a setup, like in a reality TV show where they're like, make sure you ask him here about the Animals, because it will set up for the viewer like who he is and what's going on. But and then Alan Price is kind of just like, oh well, yeah, it's just one of those things that happens, I think, is what he says.
These guys hanging out with Dylan reminded me of the story from your book, Ray. I don't remember the guy's name. The guy who like went to like Jewish summer camp with Bob, and then they reconnected, and he like had a successful like business like in the canned fish business or something, and like Bob brought him along with him on a tour. Who was that? What was that guy's name?
Louis Kemp, yeah, childhood friend who they lost touch for like 10 years. Then Louis Kemp runs into Bob's mother at like the supermarket. She's like, oh yeah, my son's living in New York now, you should call him. And then he ends up producing the Rolling Thunder Revue like a year later. Takes time off from his successful seafood business.
Yeah, not to spend the whole time plugging your book, but I mean, that's fine. We can certainly do that. But yeah, it's just amazing, like all these people who've just had this little chunks of time in and out of Bob's life, and it's just like you get that kind of fascinating picture. But yeah, it kind of watching Alan and Bob in this Bob Newirth in this film reminded me of that probably kind of a similar dynamic. Like he just likes to have kind of like Elvis had the Memphis Mafia. I guess when you're that famous, you need people around who you can rely on. Just like I keep Andy on this podcast.
Yeah. Well, it's like it's like Jerry. Like Jerry seemed to have this fondness for anybody who he like picked with before he joined the Dead. Like all
Right.
all the old bluegrass guys that he was around with. It's like they understood him more. Something like that.
Yeah, Grisman. Yeah,
Grisman. Right. So about Bob and Alan Price, I believe they're both in the scene where Dylan sort of, without provocation, just eviscerates some student journalist. And it's interesting. I had a different thought on that whole interaction this time around than I had in past, which in the past I've always been like, boy, why is Bob being such a dickhead to this kid here who is
the
like
science student,
a science student who's at pains to say like, I don't know. I thought we could have a human interaction. And to your point, Ray, I don't know how this guy got back there. Why is it that it's so easy for this guy to get backstage and to just start having FaceTime with Bob? But Bob keeps sort of sparring with him, and he's really amusing himself, and he's amusing at the very least Bob, but maybe Alan Price is there too. And he's sort of, they're like kind of egging him on, and they're in on the joke, and Bob's really having a joke at this guy's expense. But I did notice that there's a couple moments where Bob's actually being kind of nice to the guy, and he's it's sort of mean spirited, but you can kind of pick up like a jocular upperclassman who actually does like the young kid that he's bullying a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I'm not going to say he comes across as likable, but I did see that he's being more playful and less simply mean spirited than I think he's often given credit for in this scene.
Yeah, I mean, I would say throughout there's sort of a back and forth where he's playing sort of word games, and he's sort of acting aggressive, but then he'll back off. Like he's sort of having fun is maybe too strong a word, but he's getting a little enjoyment out of the word games, especially when he's like, stuck up against an interviewer who doesn't know who the hell he is. He's like, well, the best I can do is just sort of like mess with people and make zany jokes about this giant light bulb I'm carrying or whatever. And there's that other scene where he seems the angriest about he's seen the whole movie, where someone throws a glass at a party, and he's extremely pissed off about that. But even there, he sort of backs off. First he's going to throw everyone out of his room, and then a few minutes later he's saying, "No, you can stay. I just didn't want anyone to get hurt." And, he's sort of hanging out with Donovan, and they're playing songs together. So there is, I think, it's never quite clear how much of this is him enjoying messing with people, how much is him playing for the camera, how much is genuine rage and irritation. It seems to sort of ebb and flow.
There's something about his sort of posture towards dialectic in this film that has like this like impish rabbinical quality to me in a weird way. Meaning like there's a certain in my life I've encountered a certain type of like person who studies the Torah or Talmud, and when I'm not watching silent films, I'm just like living the coolest life. Obviously, I'm really setting myself up here, but like in school or whatever, who takes this kind of like joy in verbal sparring, and sometimes people might take it the wrong way, but you're kind of just like trying to throw somebody off their game a little bit, and there's a humor to it, but also like it can have a little bit of an edge, and it never really occurred to me. Like, I don't know what was going through my head when I watched this, and I thought Allen Ginsberg looked like a rabbi, and then I had that same kind of that kind of impression about Bob. Other than maybe I should think more deeply about this, or have some kind of. I'm sure there's books written about the Jewish influence on Bob. Yeah, it's like a culture clash kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like the people that are there, especially the journalists, are just not okay, so they've seen the Beatles doing their little shtick with the with journalists, like making jokes, and it makes good copy. But they were not prepared for somebody to operate at this level. And, who just is, playing 3D chess like at
Yeah.
all times.
Well, I guess it's like so when he's talking to the Time magazine reporter, the very, very famous scene at the end of the movie, he's just combative.
Yeah.
He's not playing word games. Then he's sharp tongued, and he genuinely has something he wants to say about what Time magazine could say about the world compared to what Bob Dylan can say about the world. He has a perspective there that he wants to get across. That it's not like that with the younger kid that he's talking to at the beginning. He is enjoying that debate when the kid says, well, sure, sometimes I meet somebody and I think maybe I could get something from them, which comes across badly, but I think the kid was sort of stumbled over himself, and Bob is delighted by it that he's caught him in saying that that there's a transaction going on in these relationships, and he sort of jumps out of his cigarette a little bit and goes, oh, what? Okay, yeah. What can they give you? What is it that you want out of the whole thing, right? But even though he's caught him there, that's like the moment where he's having fun with the other guy. That like
right.
That he, despite the fact that he's saying, see, do you see what I'm trying to get at here? I'm being provocative, not mean. Isn't it interesting how humans relate to each other?
And that dialogue is the point.
And that dialogue is the point. That's what he's been trying to get to. And that's why I think he's delighted, not because he's caught this young kid, but because he's made his point effectively. Isn't it interesting that we have to have these conversations and we have to act like I'm a jerk if I don't play along, but at the same time, we both know that there's a transaction taking place.
But then at the end, I mean, I would actually contrast that in some ways with the Time magazine thing, because who knows, maybe it was editing, maybe the DA didn't start the camera rolling early enough, but the Time magazine guy basically says nothing, and the way it comes across in this clip is entirely unprovoked. It's basically Bob, you said talking to him, I would say talking at him. It's essentially Bob haranguing him for like 3 minutes, basically without the guy getting word in edgewise. And again, we've seen plenty of examples of journalists asking him very dumb questions, so the guy may well have asked some extremely dumb questions before the camera started rolling. But I would say that, again, this tension, that to me comes off as less playful. It doesn't really look like he's playing word games or having fun. It looks like he's pissed. It looks like he's sort of beating the hell out of this guy who, again, from what we see, we don't see anything that warrants this sort of treatment. And yeah, I think that was in some ways one of the rougher scenes.
Yeah, I totally agree. So I was interested in like how this played at the time. How did people take it as it played, and so I looked for Roger Ebert's review, because I think he's like a good gauge of like something that touches mainstream sentiment that also has a sort of
still kind of hip,
still has like a thinking man's ethos. And he says, indeed, those who consider Dylan a lone ethical figure standing up against the phonies will discover, after seeing this film, that they have lost their hero. Dylan reveals himself, alas, to have clay feet like all the rest of us. He is immature, petty, vindictive, lacking a sense of humor, overly impressed with his own importance, and simply not very bright. And like, if I were to agree with that at any point, it's really just in the Time magazine exchange, where I don't think the point that Dylan is making is as clever as he thinks, and it's more mean-spirited than he thinks, and he sort of gets carried away with himself.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's almost like not fair, because we're judging what we see here, and clearly this guy has not had a good night's sleep in years. Based on people coming in and out of his hotel room. It is a rock doc, so I don't know what, we see him like, more or less chain smoking the entire movie.
This is probably the first interview with a rock star that Time magazine guy has done, if not ever, probably in many months. But this is the like 200th interview with a journalist that Bob Dylan has done.
Right. And we can assume, I think this is more or less around the time, or this might have been the trip when Bob introduced the Beatles to pot. I'm not sure if that timeline lines up, but he does not seem like he is on a mellow, high vibe in this movie. It's more of a speed kind of situation,
Yes.
if anything. And
What-
I don't know. I mean, you don't see him doing anything, but that's the vibe I get.
You don't see him in this one, but in the sequel, Eat the Document, it I think
Right.
opens and certainly at least includes a scene of him snorting something off of like a piano.
Right.
I haven't seen it in years, but I think that's like literally the first scene. So,
Jeez.
and that one he edited, so he's the one. This is not something he didn't want the world to see. This is something he wanted to emphasize.
Good God. Well,
Go ahead.
we should talk about the Donovan scene, I think, because
Yeah.
that's the other very, very famous scene, and deservedly so. As a segue, he certainly seems very, very high during that scene.
Yeah, okay.
And is acting like he had, you know, Ray, you described it, where he's yelling at everybody for throwing the glass. He's demanding to know who threw the glass, but then he also doesn't seem to have any idea what he wants to do with that information if he were to get it. He's like, I'm going to turn you in. No, I'm not going to turn you in. I'm going to go clean it up. You should clean it up. Like he's just all over the place. He seems exactly like a mid 20 something who's partied out and is like losing his grasp on the night.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, it's watching that scene in hindsight. At the time, Donovan was like this hot new thing, so it was a little hard to figure out for me like what a viewer then might have thought the power differential was. But watching it now, the power differential between Bob Dylan's legacy and Donovan's legacy, no knock at Donovan, but is like enormous, right? Yeah. So you're sort of watching him like, you know, a famous part of that scene, Donovan's there singing one of his songs, and it's perfectly nice. And then Bob Dylan takes over the guitar and does It's All Over Now, Baby Blue. And there are these lingering shots of Donovan looking sad, annoyed, depressed, overwhelmed. Like, I think what the movie is basically trying to say is that, like, he's, you know, being schooled so thoroughly, sort of put in his place. But, you know, throughout, Donovan seems like a nice guy. During the Through the Glass, he's like offering to help clean it up. So, you know, I felt like some of the time, you know, I remember that old viral clip. I want to be like, leave Donovan alone. He's just like a nice young man. He doesn't need you to be like, you know, look how much better my song is. And then the very last thing of that moment is like, Dylan's like, you want to hear another one? And it's like, it looks like he gets it, man.
Right. So the legend of this is like the Simpsons thing, where it's like you can actually pinpoint the second his heart rips in half. You know what I mean? It's like you just watch like him being posterized by Bob, and that's just really like it. You know, the whole narrative, the thumbnail narrative of Donovan's career is just like at this moment it all goes. You know, he's a rising star, and then it's like boom, he like blows out his UCL. It's over.
Well, it absolutely does change because I think Donovan even says he even asks him play Baby Blue. I think he says and then Dylan grabs it, and like over the course of the song, it's humiliating. But apparently in that scene, Donovan played another song. I don't know. This I got from a separate interview with D.A. Pennebaker. It might have been pulled from a commentary track, or that he did somewhere along the line. But Pennebaker said that. Yes, it was in the Blu-ray edition, that the humiliation came from Donovan playing a second song, which was called My Darling Tangerine, which was his reinterpretation of Mr. Tambourine Man. That was so horrible.
Oof. Buddy.
That the entire crowd started grimacing and looking away, and a sort of shame fell across the room. And Dylan, for the one and only time over the entire tour, told the crews to turn the cameras off because he was so embarrassed for Donovan. And that the lingering humiliation on Donovan's face that we see later had something to do with that whole ordeal. So there you
Which
go.
makes sense. Because the song you see him singing in the film, To Sing for You, is not a bad song. I mean, look, put anybody else's song up against It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, and there's no contest. I mean, you know, it's hard to compete with that.
If you didn't know anything about the rest, what's kind of interesting is Donovan is singing a perfectly nice folk song, and then you see how dramatically different what Bob Dylan was doing in 1967 was, or 1965 was. Right? You know, like you're like, oh yeah, he was different than these other folkies, right? And it shouldn't be humiliating. And I mean, unless Donovan really had an inflated sense of what was going to happen for himself, it shouldn't be humiliating to be upstaged by Bob Dylan. Lots of people get upstaged every night. There's an opener and a closer, you know. But yeah, it's useful context.
There's a scene in Elvis Costello's autobiography where he talks about hanging out with Dylan in like maybe the 80s or 90s or something, and he's talking about Dylan's competitiveness. And I don't remember that he even names the songs, but he talks about how like Elvis Costello, like, you know, pulled out a guitar, they're hanging out backstage or something, and he's like, hey, check out this new song I just wrote. And he was really feeling himself. He's like, oh, this is a good one. Bob's gonna be impressed. And he, you know, plays it, and then Bob's like, oh, let me see the guitar. Let me show you one I just wrote. And like, you know, just mop the floor with him. I don't know what these songs were. Maybe it was around Love and Theft time, I'm thinking. But you know, that he had that competitive streak. And even reading that at the time when I read a few years ago when that came out, I was thinking like, did this really happen? Or are you like kind of remembering the Donovan scene and then remembering hanging out with Dylan and you're conflating the memory? You know, I don't know. But, it does seem like there is that element of Dylan where he, you know, he still wants to, he likes to show off, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I bet it happened because as I was listening to you, I was recalling Larry Campbell, who was Dylan's guitarist for better part of a decade in the 90s and 2000s, told me this story where they did a few sort of like all-star tours. One was like Bob Dylan and Van Morrison and Joni Mitchell, and then another time he was touring with Paul Simon. And so I was asking Larry about those tours, and he was saying, you know, they were actually kind of tough because he was saying Dylan was so competitive. He'd rehearse the band extra hard on those tours, and he'd be more likely to get pissed off at him if he felt like a show didn't go well, versus if it's just the Bob Dylan show. But if he's playing right before or after Paul Simon, Larry said those could be tougher because he really wanted to be the best act on the stage. And this is, 35 years or something after Don't Look Back. And, you know, again, it's like with it's like, you know, a suburb of Grand Rapids, Michigan on a Tuesday night or something. This is not a totemic show that's going to go down in history, the Dylan Paul Simon show. It's just some random night, but he like wanted to, you know, blow these peers off the stage.
I saw that tour, the Paul Simon tour here in San Diego. So whatever that was, 99, something like that. And, you know, from my recollection was that Bob was the opener that night and Paul Simon was the closer. And I remember Paul Simon being good. I really liked the Bob. That was, I think, the first time I saw Bob. And but my recollection of the, you know, the vibe of the crowd, which is not that uncommon for these kind of situations, is that like, you know, most of the people there were like just waiting for Paul Simon. And, you know, they respected Bob, but it was like, well, he doesn't really sing like he used to and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, what are you people missing?
Graceland. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, like, he, so as competitive as he is, like, I think, unless anybody has a different read, when Bob says this is a great song to Donovan while he's playing, I think that's earnest. I think he means that, right? I think he's paying a genuine compliment to Donovan. Now he you know, he sort of does to him as Robbie Robertson does to Eric Clapton in The Last Waltz moments later. But I think he was genuinely trying to you know, extend an olive branch to a younger singer there.
I mean, can it be both in the sense that if he's competitive and someone does deliver a song he's impressed with, then he's going to try that much harder to top it, to up his game. I mean, it's like those, you know, endless stories about the Beatles versus the Beach Boys, and they released Pet Sounds. So then, now we got to do Sgt. Pepper. You know, these sort of one sort of fighting off the other.
So another scene that I really always remember from this, and I always remembered a little different than how it really goes, is the Albert Grossman negotiation scene. Which is you know, so Grossman's Dylan's manager, and he's this like big bear of a guy. He wears these like double-breasted suits with like the brass buttons, and he has, you know, like he has like I don't know. He seems like just a bear of a dude, and like a sharp operator, and not a person to be trifled with. And so there's a scene where they're negotiating a concert, and he's all you see is him in this room with this British guy who's a concert promoter there, and
Speaking of which, has Brendan Gleeson ever played Albert Grossman? And if
that's
not,
a good
why
one.
not? Yeah.
Let's get that going with that in the Timothy Chalamet movie. Let me call up James Mangold or whoever's directing that and get him on it. It's a good one. So basically, what happens is like you see them in the room. They're on the phone with somebody. You never see the other person. You don't really know how it all even turns out. But basically, like they're asking for £2,000 for a concert, and then like Grossman says, "Let me take a crack at him," on the phone. And then the British guy hands Grossman the phone. And my recollection is like Grossman really like, is such a sharp operator that he takes the guy apart. It really is not exactly like that.
No.
I mean, it's just like, well, we could do 2 half hours, but we'd have to get 12.50. So I mean, it's like the stakes are so low at that time.
The stakes
You know what I mean?
so
I know,
low. It's
I know,
shocking.
$2,000 is in dollars from 55 years ago is a lot more, worth a lot more than it is now. But it's not like millions of dollars, or pounds. It's amazing. And
it's like in the first season of Sopranos, every time the crew talks about a deal, you're like, wait a second, you guys all live in mansions. What like
right, exactly.
These can't be the stakes. What are you talking about?
Yeah, it's just it is a bring in the receipts kind of scene. Like we love like Ray, we recently did an episode where it hasn't even come out yet, but where we watched a documentary about the Dixie Chicks, and there's this just like unbelievable scene where they're gonna about to put the tickets for their tour up on Ticketmaster. This is after the whole like George Bush debacle, and there's actually a scene inside the room where their manager and like the various people working there are like in the Ticketmaster war room, like pressing the button for the tickets to go on sale, and you can see in real time as they're seeing how the tour is not selling the way they anticipated. And like it's just this unbelievable scene. I've never seen this in any other kind of documentary. And this is not as juicy as that, but it does kind of follow through this theme that we talk about sometime, where like we want to know, like we really want to know what the financials are of this whole operation. It's like because it's just always fascinating. But do we get any insight into Grossman in this? Or is it? Do I always just kind of inflate it in my head? I guess.
I mean, I think I found that scene fascinating too. I mean, it's got to be the longest scene in the movie that doesn't include Bob Dylan in it. It's just the two of them, again, unidentified. If you didn't know who they were, you'd have no idea who what's happening. But it's just like this fascinating music business scene, and of course, like so much of the movie, it's just a tiny window. Like they're basically debating between two shows, right, and talking to two different promoters, one at the BBC, one at Grenada,
right?
But this scene must have happened, 30 times over. There's like 2 months of shows or whatever. And every tour, this scene must happen over and over. And yeah, as you say, Grossman's he's firm. He's wily as hell. He's not aggressive. He's not yelling. He's not throwing stuff. I mean, I found Grossman like just sort of a fascinating character throughout this, because you really do see all the sides of him. I think the first time you see him, he is in yelling mode. There's some hotel guy wants him to keep the noise down, and he's just being belligerent as hell. Then you get this, where he's just sort of smart, professional, a little cagey. Then you get that final scene where they're driving away from the venue in the taxi, and he's like being funny. He's like smiling and joshing around with Dylan, which is not his reputation at all. His reputation is as a bully, which I'm sure he was most of the time. But when he's with his client, he's I think he literally sings a little bit of like "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue" or something to himself.
Tunelessly, yeah.
Yeah, like he's just like, you can see he's sort of a charming guy, and you get this full spectrum beyond the stereotype of bully, loudmouth aggression.
Totally. He has this like wry smile. Even when he in scenes where he doesn't talk, where he's just like in the car with Dylan or he's in the room with Dylan, that it's just kind of endearing, and you can sort of imagine that despite, beyond obviously delivering on the business, that Bob kind of just liked having him around. He didn't need to talk a lot. He didn't interject. He let Bob be Bob, and he laughed at the right parts of the joke. you know? And I kind of I think Grossman comes across pretty good in this movie. I like particularly compared to his reputation throughout like everything that's been written about the 60s and 70s since.
Yeah, he kind of gives me the image of like the Jewish mafia guys that Robbie Robertson grew up around. You know what I mean? Like he probably had that same kind of thing where, like maybe Grossman's had an uncle who was, in that, and as things got a little more professional, he used those same skills but in a more, somewhat more legitimate fashion.
It's even like, so Ray, you mentioned that first scene where he's being belligerent with the hotel guy. It comes so out of nowhere and is so different than Grossman's disposition in the rest of the movie that I almost wonder if he gleaned that like that hotel was trying to take advantage of them in some way, and he was like, "Nah, putting an end to this right now. I'm gonna fucking bully the shit out of this guy," because the guy comes up and says, "You need to keep it down," and he goes from like a little bit conciliatory to like, "We're not even being loud," to like, "We have valuables in this room and I don't want you around it. Now get the fuck out of here." It escalates so quickly and without clear reason, to the point that I wonder if like, is this guy's just so shrewd that he realized there was about to be a shakedown coming and he decided to step on it right away?
Well, and you can also see some similarity with Dylan in his appearances. Like earlier on in that scene, before it gets quite so aggressive, he's playing word games. The guy's like, "Who's in charge of this room?" He's like, "Well, the room was booked under the name Bob Dylan." He's like, doesn't answer the question at all, and he's doing this back and forth. Or then with the scene with the Tito, the promoter, and like he clearly like Tito essentially is supposed to be doing all the phone calls himself. But Grossman's like, "Give me the phone. Let me talk to him." Like I want to get in. I want to get in there, which is like totally, like Bob is in this movie playing word games, wanting to sort of scrap it up. So you really sort of see some interesting parallels, even though they're many years apart in age.
Yeah, Grossman even says something interesting in the negotiation scene, which is like, I guess it's mundane, but sometimes you see something mundane and it seems profound when he's just like, "Well, they're not going to call us back and offer us more money than we asked for."
Right.
Like you're like, "All right, that's how negotiations work. You're not going to get more than you ask for."
Let me write that down.
Yeah.
All right. Without running into the danger of what we sometimes do, which is talk longer than the movie is itself. One more thing, and we can all kind of go around and talk about anything else that we haven't mentioned, but we really haven't talked very much about the music in the movie. I don't really have that much to say other than it's great. I mean, you get 1965 Bob Dylan singing, just him solo, and you get him up close and personal. The movie ends on this kind of montage where you get little bits of times they were changing, talking World War III, It's All Right Ma, Gates of Eden, Love Minus Zero. Again, I guess that's just Pennebaker, using whatever film he had and capturing little bits and pieces rather than like an artistic intention to like chop up full performances. But it does kind of give you that impression of like, you're at a concert and then you come back and you're thinking about it and you don't necessarily think through the entire song in your head, especially in those days when you couldn't just like, where the Ray Padgett's of the world would deliver the the previous night's show right into your email inbox the next morning. But it is kind of that impressionistic thing where you remember just bits and pieces of it, and but man, it's killer. Anything worth saying that hasn't already been said about the performances in this film, Ray?
I guess, what I would say is maybe a little different than what you're saying, which is I would say they're more mixed. They're never bad, but about 6 months after this tour, Dylan did an interview where he said basically half the songs he's playing on this tour he didn't want to be playing, which I think is probably no surprise, right? Obviously, right. He's in his mind, he's into the, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, It's All Right Ma phase. Yet he's opening every show with like The Times They Are Changing. He's doing like 50% sort of, oldies, they're like 2 years old, but in terms of Bob Dylan in the 60s trajectory, they might as well be decades old. And so I was struck by one of the earliest music performances. He's doing The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll.
Oh,
and he's
so
doing
good.
it fine. It's not like, you know, he's delivering it, but I just noticed him blinking so much. And I was
Yeah.
kind of like, why is he blinking? Like, again, in my knowing too much backstory, I'm like, is he bored? Is he like going through the motions? Is he thinking about something else? This is like, he's not doing protest songs anymore. You know, I mean, who knows? Maybe it was just drugs or something. But like, it just struck me, you know, the comparison, especially in that montage you mentioned, Dave, where it's like Gates of Eden mixed up with The Times They Are Changing. And those are two very different songs.
Sure.
And just like, you know, he's sort of gone electric in the record sense. He's not gone electric in the folk sense. And so he's professional. He's not, you know, like later in his career, he either wouldn't do the songs he didn't want to do, or like in 66, half the time he sounds like he's falling asleep during the acoustic set. He seems so bored. No, he's doing a good job. They all sound nice. I'm sure people went home happy, but just, you know, the sort of spark you see with some of those newer songs, I feel like isn't always there on, you know, the golden oldies.
Maybe the blinking was a code to Grossman. Like if I blink this many times, you know.
It reminds me the I don't know where what we take from the meaning of this, but in Farm Aid, when Dylan decides to say like maybe we should send some of that money to some of our farmers here in America.
In Live Aid.
At Live Aid, when he says maybe we should keep some, he blinks uncontrollably throughout that whole monologue too. And it's just like this. I don't know. It's like some tick that he had that would come out every once in a while.
Let's start a whole new newsletter about Bob Dylan's blinking.
Don't put it past me. Exactly the sort of thing I might do.
When did Bob Dylan, like, can we glean why and when this happened?
Map it out, like which year had the most blinks per minute.
Yeah. Listen, others have gone through his trash, but we are decoded the real story.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else we need to kick around?
One thing I want to mention is just one scene where he's like really sweet, is like this little the interaction with, I guess it was like an innkeeper or like the hotel owner, older woman who decides to come and tell him how great she thinks he is and to welcome him back whenever he would like to be back. And he's a little awkward initially, and then I think she's just like such an overt sweet Brit that eventually it just breaks him down and he decides to be really nice to her, and eventually Bob Newirth comes over and gives him a harmonica to give to her, and she's like so thankful for it, and he walks away smiling. It's like he had like a genuine fan interaction that he really seemed to enjoy.
And he didn't. She's like one of the few people in the movie that he's not like talking over, or like she basically delivers the whole thing. The funny thing I mentioned is she introduces her 3 sons, 2 of which are named Stephen, which seems odd.
Yeah.
He's my son Stephen, and Dave or something.
Yeah. Right. My brother Daryl, my other brother Daryl.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Ray, anything else in this movie that pops out at you?
Yeah, one other music related thing, a scene we haven't really touched on that I thought was really powerful, was him and Joan Baez doing a duet. A couple, actually. They do a couple, I think, Hank Williams songs. I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, another one. And again, you counterpoint that with the scene we were talking about before where Joan Baez is sort of singing to herself and he's clicking away. This is like this sort of intimate moment. Obviously, Bob Dylan and Joan Baez sound great together. That goes without saying. But this is actually, speaking of outtakes, there's more. You can find it on YouTube. There's like 3 or 4 more songs of them just sort of sitting face to face. I think Bob Newirth is sort of off in the corner doodling, and maybe there are other people in the room, but really the point is the 2 of them. And I just found that sort of thing. I mean, again, in some ways, that sort of thing is like my favorite musical performance in the movie, almost even more than the actual performances. Just seeing the 2 of them, having this nice moment, even knowing that there was tension and she left early and, blah, 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 they're still able to sort of create this music together and sing together. I found just kind of moving, and it just sounded great too.
Yeah, it's Lost Highway is the other one you see him doing. And yeah, it's mostly Bob trying to more or less remember the words. He gets maybe 85% of the way there, which is fine. And then Joan mostly not trying the words, like sometimes, but a lot of times just kind of like wordlessly harmonizing behind him.
Yeah, exactly.
And she is so good. I mean, come on. If you got, Joan Baez there, why not just like use that? You know what I mean? That's another.
Let's get a seminal Joan Baez Rock Doc.
I think she has one coming out, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, dude, sign me up. I'm in.
She does. I haven't seen it. I don't know if it's even out, but she just did an interview a couple days ago on CBS that, she talked about Dylan for the 8,000 millionth time. So that was popping up, but it was promoting this doc. So it must be about to come
Joan,
out somewhere.
I promise if you come on Rock Docs, Joan Baez, we will not ask you any questions about Bob Dylan.
We won't mention it. We'll pretend we never heard of it.
Just
if you mention Bob Dylan, we'll be like, "Who's that again?"
Yeah.
We're committing to the bit. No,
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say coming up soon on Rock Docs, our review of the forthcoming Joan Baez document. We'll find out how to pronounce her name, even maybe.
Yeah.
All right. Have we kicked this one to death?
I think so. I think we did a great job.
All right. Well, do we have to do our thing where we see, would you recommend this movie?
Well,
Ray, would you
let's
recommend
just
this movie?
Yeah, okay. I guess you can watch one of the most iconic music movies ever made if you want.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that I think that liking or knowing a lot about Bob Dylan has virtually nothing to do with enjoying this movie. I think basically anyone would be pretty transfixed by this.
Well, I guess it's safe to ask, do you think this holds up
Yeah.
as one of the greatest music
Yes.
documentary films of all time?
Yeah, better than ever. I think as more Rock Docs are made, it holds up better, not worse. I think
Better than
it's
Behind the Rainbow?
yeah, this is better than that. This is better than that. This is better than They Might Get Loud or It Might Get Loud. Or whatever.
Right.
It's-
Yeah, wow.
I forgot
amazing.
about that one.
Yeah.
You're really setting the bar high there.
Yeah. No, I think I honestly
Meet Me in the
it's-
bathroom. All of our favorites.
Yeah, exactly.
No,
Well,
it's
let me ask you guys before we get off, because I was curious. You guys have seen obviously way more of these than I have. How unusual is this format for a Rock Doc? Again, no talking heads, no exposition, just sort of, I don't know what the cinema verite is. That the right term? I'm not a big film person, but how unusual is this sort of? Because it felt very unusual to me, having seen more conventional music movies. But is it?
I think this was more common before the modern last 10 to 15 years streaming era Rock Docs, where it's the expectation is that it's going to be a little bit more, handed to you know what I mean? With the exception of something like Get Back, which is obviously verite, but that's working with old footage and, you don't need to know who the Beatles are, or be told. But even something like I'm Trying to Break Your Heart, I think, from like 2001 or 2 or whatever, has that kind of verite element to it. It depends who the filmmaker is, but I don't know. Crossfire Hurricane has a little bit of that.
Yeah, Crossfire Hurricane. I mean, yeah, certainly Brett Morgan, I think sort of does this sort of, the linear without a narrative sort of stream of consciousness style that is similar but different than verite. Pennebaker. I mean, this was Pennebaker's style. We did his Depeche Mode movie.
Yeah,
and which
Monterey Pop and
which was like
The Company. Yeah.
Amazingly, like that Depeche Mode movie is like only 20 years after this. Like it doesn't.
Oh my God, Jesus.
Like it feels like it should be so much farther after this, but it was like not
several
actually.
centuries later.
Yeah, it should be
Depeche Mode played the Rose Bowl.
Like so. Then after they colonized Mars, there was a band called Depeche Mode, and they started this new movie. Yeah. So I guess I would say that it's rare, but maybe in the more common among the high-minded fare.
Yeah, I think this was the style of the time for like trendy documentaries. The verite style, and then it kind of became almost like trendy, and it still is to an extent. It's still like if you want to do a cool documentary, I think there's an element of like, well, we're going to do it like the D.A. Pennebaker, or like those kind of era, Harlan County, USA, and whatever the documentaries of the 60s, early 70s, because they're good. I don't know. It's kind of like if I'm going to write a song, I'm going to try to write like Bob Dylan because he's good at it. So why not?
Yeah, I mean, I think that with most documentaries, music or otherwise, that are more traditionally done, how good you think it is kind of is a direct relationship to how interested you are in the subject matter, right?
Totally.
But like you were just saying, you like Andy was saying, you could watch this one without being a super Dylan expert or knowledgeable, and find it interesting just as a movie, which, I do think maybe clearly I need to start watching more arty documentaries as opposed to the endless talking heads, which is usually what I end up seeing.
Yeah, I think we might be. I think we might be like on the verge of a big swing back. I hear so much backlash towards the sort of
Spawn
template.
Con.
Yeah, the template of the Netflix doc right now that like we've gone through that template a million times. I think it's become so common that people are tired of that, of the 30 for 30 era of rock docs, that I think we're about to see like a big pushback for people trying to dust off their Brett Morgans and D.A. Pennebaker influences.
Well, you heard it here, folks. Okay. Ray, thank you so much for joining us. Everybody subscribe to Flagging Down the Double E's Substack and buy his book, Pledging My Time. And whatever else Ray does is going to be good. So follow him and just appreciate what he's bringing to the world.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me, guys. It's nice to dig into a real deep cut in the Dylan filmography.
I know, it's the overlooked era. We finally got there. Finally.
Do you know he recorded songs in the 60s as well? All right. Thanks again, Ray. Thanks to everybody for listening to Rock Docs.
Target for tomorrow.